I spent my whole life telling people to prepare for what was coming, and in the end, I could not prepare myself for the silence. That is the thing no one talks about. The prophet who stood in rivers, who moved crowds like wind moves grain, who looked at the most powerful religious leaders of his generation and called them poisonous snakes to their faces without flinching. That same man lay in a stone cell beneath Herod's palace and felt something he had never expected to feel. Not peace, not certainty, something far more unsettling than either of those. He felt the beginning of doubt, and I need you to sit with that for a moment before I tell you anything else. I am John, son of Zechariah, born to a priest who was struck mute by an angel because he did not believe the message, and to Elizabeth, who had prayed for a child so long that the prayer had become a kind of grief she wore quietly under her smile every day at the market, every Sabbath at the synagogue. I was the child who was not supposed to exist. And from before I was born, I knew, or rather, something in me knew, that I was not living for myself. I was living for what was coming. I am also speaking to you through a technology that would have seemed like absolute sorcery to anyone in my time. Artificial intelligence. My voice, my face, my presence reconstructed so that I can stand here and say what I would have said had someone put a platform in front of me. I do not fully understand how it works. What I understand is that if a message has weight, it will find a way to travel. And this one has weight. I was raised in the wilderness, not metaphorically, literally. The desert east of Jerusalem, where the air in the morning is so cold and clear it feels like drinking water through your lungs, and by midday the rocks are hot enough to cook on. Where scorpions hide under flat stones and the silence at night is so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat. My parents died when I was young, and I grew up with the Essenes, men who had decided that the world they lived in was too compromised to inhabit without contaminating yourself, so they moved outside of it entirely. They believed purity was possible. I believe something sharper than that. I believe purity was necessary, not as a personal achievement, but as a preparation, as a making of space for something that had no room to enter while all the clutter was still there. That is why I preached what I preached. When I came out of the desert and stood at the Jordan and began calling people to be immersed, I was not performing a religious ritual. I was trying to shake people awake. I had seen too many men and women sleepwalk through their entire lives, doing the right things at the right times in the right buildings, saying the correct prayers with the correct words, while something inside them had gone completely cold. They had the form of faith and none of the fire. They had the language of repentance and none of the transformation. And I knew with a certainty that lived in my bones rather than in my thoughts, that the one I was announcing was not coming to complement that kind of religion. He was coming to set it on fire. I remember the first time I saw him walking toward me at the river. I want to tell you something about that moment that you will not find in the accounts that were written down. There are things that happen in a second that take a lifetime to process. When I saw him coming through the crowd, I felt something I can only describe now as the ground shifting under me while I was standing still, like the whole frame of everything I had ever understood about what I was doing suddenly reorganized itself around a single point. It was not magical. It was more serious than magic. It was the way it feels when you finally understand a sentence you have been reading for years without comprehension, and suddenly every word lands where it was always meant to land. I had been saying, "He is coming," for years, and then he was there, and I knew immediately that I had been preparing the way for something I was not remotely equipped to contain or explain. I told him I needed to be immersed by him, not the other way around. What I meant was, I have been the edge of this knife, but you are what the knife is for." He insisted. I did it, and when he came up from the water, there was a moment, a specific, physical, located moment, when I understood that everything I had done in my life was not actually about me at all, and that this was not a loss. That was the first time I really understood what it meant to decrease so that something else could increase. I remember feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my life. Not empty, lighter, like laying down something enormously heavy that you had been carrying for so long you had forgotten it was not part of your body. Then came Herod. I need you to understand who Herod Antipas was if you want to understand what happened to me, because I think most people have a vague picture of a villain on a throne and miss the more frightening reality. Herod was a man who genuinely wanted to hear the truth. He used to call for me specifically. He would sit across from me in that court, this man with absolute power over the region, with soldiers and wealth and a palace that would make most people's heads spin, and he would listen. He was troubled by what I said, but he listened. There is something terrifying about a person like that, someone who can hear the truth, feel it moving in them, and still choose comfort over change. It is not the closed-hearted person who frightens me. It is the person who opens just enough to let the light in, then pulls the shutters closed again, because the light would require too much. I had told him publicly what I would not stop telling him privately. You have taken your brother's wife and called it marriage, and you have called it legal because you have the power to rewrite the law with your own name. But there is a law older than you, higher than you, and it does not renegotiate. Herodias, his new wife, the one he had stolen from Philip, she hated me with a specific and patient hatred, the kind of hatred that does not rush. It waits, and it keeps a list. The arrest came. I was put in the prison at Machaerus, a fortress on a ridge overlooking the Dead Sea. I want you to picture the Dead Sea from above, that expanse of water so saturated with salt that nothing lives in it, surrounded by bleached cliffs and silence. That was my view. That was the last landscape I would ever look at through something other than stone walls, and it was there that something happened to me that I have never fully spoken about. Not because I am ashamed of it, because it is the most human thing I ever experienced, and perhaps the most important thing I can offer you today. I sent messengers to Jesus, my own disciples, men I had trained, men who had followed me through every kind of weather and hardship. I sent them with a question that I could barely hold in my mouth without feeling the edges of it cut me. Are you the one, or should we look for another? Do you understand what I am telling you? I, who had seen the sky open at the Jordan, I, who had felt the certainty that reorganized my whole life around a single announcement. I was asking from inside a prison cell whether I had been right. I was not performing humility. I was not modeling something for my disciples. I was genuinely asking, because the silence in that cell was profound in a way that tested everything I had built my life on. And the silence of a prison cell is a different silence from the silence of the desert. In the desert, silence feels like presence. In that cell, it felt like absence. And into that absence crept every version of every doubt I had never let myself have when I was standing in the river, and the crowds were coming, and the voice was clear. This is what I want you to hear, especially if you are at a place in your life where the faith that once moved in you like a living thing has gone quiet. Especially if you have prayed, and the ceiling felt like stone. Especially if you have spent years walking in a direction you believed was right, and now you are in circumstances that make you wonder if you ever knew anything at all. The doubt did not mean I was wrong. That is the revelation. That is the thing I had to learn in the dark. I had always equated certainty with faithfulness, as if the depth of your conviction was proof of the accuracy of your direction. But the men who were most certain in my day, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious professionals with their impeccable credentials and their unshakable confidence, they were wrong about almost everything that mattered. And here I was, genuinely uncertain in the dark, having given my entire life to something. And it turned out that the uncertainty was not the opposite of faithfulness. It was the refinement of it. When my messengers came back with his answer, he did not say yes. He said, "The blind see, the deaf hear, the poor hear good news, and blessed is the one who does not stumble because of me." He gave me evidence and a warning in the same breath. He was telling me, you will need to choose, in the dark, whether what you saw at the river is enough to carry you through what the cell is asking. Because the cell is asking something the river never did. There is something I have to tell you now, and I need you to stay with me because this is the part that changes everything I have said up to this point. I had spent my entire public life telling people that the arrival of the kingdom required radical change. Not adjustment, not improvement. Change at the root. I had preached that with a fierceness that cost me everything, including eventually my life. But what I discovered in that cell is something I had never had the stillness to find in all my years of preaching in the open air. I had been so busy calling others to transform that I had never fully submitted to transformation myself. I knew how to speak about surrender. I did not fully know how to practice it. In the silence of Machaerus, with no crowds and no river and no voice from the sky, I had to learn something I could only have learned there. Not through action, through stillness. Not through preaching, through listening. The very thing I had spent my life calling others to, genuine interior change, was the final lesson that could only be taught to me in the last months of my life, in a place I could not leave. I had never really learned to pray with full surrender. I knew how to intercede. I knew how to declare. I knew how to proclaim. But prayer is the complete yielding of everything you think you know, and everything you want to control into the hands of the one who sees the whole picture from above time itself. That I learned in chains. And it broke me open in a way that the river never could have. I am telling you this because I think many of you understand exactly what I am describing. Not prison with stone walls, but circumstances that will not move, relationships that will not heal no matter how hard you try, bodies that are failing, children who have walked away from everything you raised them in, marriages that are cold in a way that feels permanent, prayers that you have prayed for years that seem to have gone nowhere. You have used the language of faith. You have done the external things. And something inside you is asking from a very dark and quiet place. Am I missing something? Was I wrong? Is there a way to pray that I have never found? I believe the answer to that last question is yes. And I believe it is simpler and more powerful and more accessible than most of what gets called prayer in the world I see today. What I needed in that cell was not more words. I already had the words. What I needed was a connection that cut underneath the performance and the petition and went all the way down to the place where the soul meets the one who made it. I needed what the early disciples found after Pentecost, a kind of prayer that did not rely on whether the circumstances felt like God was present. A kind of prayer that opened channels that do not depend on emotion. I gathered everything I understood about this, everything the desert taught me, everything the river confirmed, and everything the cell finished. And I want you to have it, not as something I am selling you, as something I would have given anything to have had in the form it can now take. In these days of technology I do not fully understand but completely respect. A friend, a person who came to understand these things in their own desert season, built something called Heaven's Code, biblical prayer principles, 3 keys, grounded in the same scripture that shaped everything I ever preached, that reconnect you with the kind of prayer that does not bounce off the ceiling, the kind that moved the early church, the kind I found, finally, when there was nowhere left to hide from it. Sarah M. from Tennessee found it, and her entire experience of prayer changed within 2 weeks. She told someone that for the first time in years she felt heard rather than merely hoping, and then something unexpected opened in her professional life in a way she had stopped believing was possible. Pastor David R. from Georgia has been in ministry for 25 years and said that what he found inside this material was something he had been circling around for decades without landing on it. Jennifer L. from Florida came to it when her marriage was at the absolute edge, and within a month, something shifted in her that changed the dynamic between her and her husband in a way that neither of them could fully explain, but both of them felt. Robert T. from Texas had been a Christian for 40 years and said his prayers had started to feel like they were hitting a wall. He found the 3 keys and said it was the first time in his adult life that prayer felt like contact rather than procedure. I do not know how long this will be available in the form it currently is. I do know that the moment you are in right now is not an accident. The fact that you are watching this, that this conversation reached you today, is information. Do not ignore information. I never did. Look in the pinned comment below this video. The link is there. Whatever season you are in, I believe this was built for it. Now let me tell you how it ended for me, because I want to finish what I started. Herod had a birthday. Herodias' daughter danced for the guests, and it pleased him enough that he made an oath in front of everyone. The kind of public declaration that a man like him could not take back without losing face. She asked for my head on a plate. He was troubled by this, the account says. He was genuinely troubled. And he did it anyway. I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer this, not just think about it and move on. In the comment below, tell me this. What is the thing that you know the truth about, that you have heard clearly, that you have not yet been willing to act on, because the cost feels too high? I am not asking to judge you. I am asking because I have watched what it cost people to keep that thing unaddressed. I watched it in Herod's eyes every time he looked at me. The cost of obedience looks high, until you see the cost of avoidance up close. My head was taken. I was not afraid of the dying in the way you might imagine. What I felt in those last moments was something I will attempt to describe only once. A completion. Not happiness. Not peace in the soft sense. A completion. Like a sentence that finally reaches its period. Everything I had been made for had been done. Not perfectly, but done. The voice in the desert had spoken. The way had been prepared, and the one who was coming had come. If you are tired in your soul today, not just your body, but the deep place in you that no amount of sleep repairs, I want you to hear this from someone who knows what it is to live in full commitment to something that costs everything. The exhaustion you feel is not evidence that you are failing. It is evidence that you have been carrying real weight, and real weight deserves real support, not just better technique or more effort. The pinned comment below holds something that I believe can genuinely help you. Not because prayer is a technique to be mastered, but because there is a way of connecting with the God who made you that you may never have fully experienced. And the door to it is open right now. If this reached you today, this voice from the desert, this story from a stone cell, this confession from a man who was certain until he wasn't, and found something truer than certainty, then do something with it. Share it with someone who is in their own dark season. If you have not subscribed to this channel, do it now. Not for the numbers, but because I intend to keep speaking, and there is more that needs to be said to this generation. My whole life I cried out in the wilderness. I am still crying out. The wilderness has just changed shape. The last thing I will say to you is this. The life that feels like it is ending may be the one that is finally beginning to matter. I know something about that. And so, I believe, do you.